Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit LegacyPMInvestments.com. That's LegacyPMInvestments.com. Happy Friday. I'm Jenna Ellis, host of Jenna Ellis Tonight on the Salem News Channel. Join me at 9 p.m. Eastern, wherever you stream or watch the Salem News Channel, because we have a lot to break down. First, Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, who is from the state of Texas and during COVID treated over 6,000 COVID patients, joins us to say why she sent a letter in 2021 to a lot of her patients talking about the efficacy of the vaccines and actually encouraging therapeutics, and why she won a lawsuit in the midst of COVID. So will there be ever COVID accountability for the government, for Fauci? Well, we're going to discuss. We also have Jeff Hunt with us for some very fun and interesting headlines, because today is Friday. All this and more on the Salem News Channel tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So as America continues to grapple with the reality that we were lied to with all of the COVID-19 propaganda and the vaccine hysteria from our government, how should our government officials and some of those that were directly involved face accountability? This headline and post coming from the X account of Dr. Mary Talley Bowden and the Houston Chronicle had posted back in November of 2021 that the doctor sent her patients 2 emails last week, this would have been in 2021, in which she falsely claimed the vaccine wasn't working. Obviously, that has changed now. And so the response to this from Dr. Bowden is, I think the Houston Chronicle owes me an apology. So Dr. Mary Talley Bowden joins me now. And Dr. Bowden, thank you so much for joining. And let's go back to 2021 and also 2020 and the propaganda and sheer hysteria that was sold and the lie of the vaccine. What did you observe in your own practice that led you to send these emails in the first place to patients?
Yeah, I am a solo physician. I'm an ear, nose, and throat doctor in Houston, and I sort of stumbled into COVID. I was doing testing. Early on, it was very hard to get a COVID test, and LabCorp was the only lab offering it, and it was taking 2 weeks to get the results back. I had been using another lab for my chronic sinusitis patients, and they came out with a PCR saliva test for COVID with results that came back the next day. So I started offering that when tests were really hard to get, and my little clinic exploded. I would tell patients, go see your primary care doctor, and we know how that went. They'd come back to me and say, well, my primary care doctor told me to do nothing. They won't see me. They told me to go to the emergency room if I can't breathe. And that didn't sit well with me, so I started treating these people. And first I used hydroxychloroquine, but then when Trump said it was the greatest thing ever, it got shut down. So then I started using antibiotics, steroids, breathing treatments, and then monoclonal antibodies came around, and I started using those. And then the government took over distribution of monoclonal antibodies, and it became impossible to get those, so I started using ivermectin. But because I was doing a lot of testing, I was seeing the breakthrough cases, and this was the third wave. This was the summer of 2021. It was 8 months after the shots came on the market. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing all these patients testing positive who are vaccinated. And not only were they testing positive, they were just as sick, if not sicker, than the unvaccinated. And I went to Methodist. I had privileges there, but I was not integral to their hospital whatsoever. I had actually never stepped foot in that hospital. I had those privileges as a backup, but I never used them. And I said to them, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And they basically gaslit me. So I started speaking out. I sent emails to my patients, and I said a few things on Twitter. I was actually pretty restrained back then, and I didn't have a following whatsoever. But they took notice, and then they went after me.
Wow. And so what was What was the outcome of, and you've treated over 6,000 COVID patients. What were some of the outcomes that you saw when you used some of these other therapeutics like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, and some of these things that, yes, President Trump was saying were positives because other doctors had seen good results from that, and then suddenly it was only the vaccine can save you and just the mandates. What was your experience with those therapeutics?
Well, admittedly, initially, I didn't think we could use anything to treat them because that's the way we're trained. We're trained that you can't do anything for a virus. But when you've got this novel situation that you've never encountered, and the alternative is going to the emergency room, then it's a natural thing for a doctor to try things that, as long as it's safe. And I dug into the safety. And once I was comfortable that I wasn't going to hurt anybody, then I didn't see anything wrong with trying things to try to keep people out of the emergency room. And everybody that I treated early within the first week survived. I even had patients coming to me who should have been in the ICU. I mean, I had a guy come in with an oxygen saturation of 62%. And he was not a healthy guy. He'd had throat cancer. He'd had 2 heart attacks. I mean, it was very, I had to basically decide that I was going to allow him to die without going to the hospital because he would not go to the hospital. And, we saved him just by, bringing him every day for IV steroids, IV vitamins, high dose ivermectin. But I had several patients like that, probably 5 or 6 patients like that, that normally I would have called 911 and said, you're headed to the emergency room, but they refused. But I learned so much. I mean, and that's what's so sad is these other doctors just didn't have an open mind, and just followed the government without questioning anything. It's really hard to believe.
Yeah, and I think we're still seeing the propaganda that is being perpetuated, and you're still not really allowed to question this, even though people like Dr. Fauci have now admitted that the vaccines are not effective in terms of stopping contraction of the virus. So let's talk about the safety of those vaccines, and even some are now admitting it's not actually a vaccine; it's just a shot. Why wasn't there more questioning at the time from medical practitioners around the safety of a novel alleged vaccine?
Yeah, I still shake my head at that. I mean, I had an open mind initially. I went to the original Pfizer study though, and I saw how it was conducted, and that was my first red flag. So I decided I am not getting it. I'm not offering it to my patients. When I started seeing the breakthroughs and I started speaking out about that, but then I started seeing all the injuries, and I've never seen anything like it with any other product on the market. Any other product would have been pulled long ago, but I looked at my new patient appointments for the 2 years following the rollout of those shots, and 7% of my new patients were coming to see me for chronic debilitating health problems that were directly related to getting these shots. Previously healthy people that had the sudden onset of severe medical problems that, invariably most of them had gone through multiple workup, multiple tests, seen multiple doctors, and none of these patients were reported to VAERS. But it's clear by the pattern of their symptoms, which is consistent with all the other patients I've seen, and the onset of these symptoms is directly related to these shots.
Wow, that is incredibly tragic. And yet we're seeing no accountability for big pharma like Pfizer and Moderna. And these products are still on the market. And, as you've mentioned previously, that these COVID vaccines are still included now in the regular vaccines that are given to children and recommended by doctors, which I think is just insane. But with the liability shield of big pharma that Congress implemented because of the novel vaccine, that's prevented a lot of litigation. And so where the cases against some big pharma have been successful in other countries have been because they haven't had that liability shield. So should Congress recontemplate that? And, where should this go in terms of genuine accountability for really weaponizing this type of product and foisting it on and compelling American citizens to take it, or else other consequences like losing their jobs?
Right. I mean, we have three ways of addressing this. The people can just say no. And, I think that's becoming more and more common, but there's still people out there that don't know how harmful these are, that still trust their pediatrician and are subjecting their little 6-month-old children to these shots. So step one is the people. I mean, we have the judicial system, but that I'm learning the hard way. That is not easy. It's very expensive, and it's not usually very fair. And then we have our politicians, and I have started a movement. I've started a 501c4 called Americans for Health Freedom, and my goal is to create momentum within our political system to get the people running for office, to get people in office to just simply state that these COVID shots should be pulled off the market. It's called americansforhealthfreedom.org. I have a growing list of people. It is not enough. We're still considered fringe. It's still considered extreme and fringe to say that these shots are not safe, and we need to change that. Because now everybody's accepted that mandates are wrong, and that is very easy. It's very politically easy. But we weren't there 2 years ago, and I'm confident that 2 years from now, everybody's going to look back and say, "I can't believe we didn't pull these shots off the market sooner." But we need to keep pushing and getting that message out there. And like I said, any other shot would have been pulled off the market a long time ago. I'm certain the majority of these politicians are not up to 9 shots as a CDC, and they're not giving them to their children. So if they're not safe enough for them or their children, they're not safe enough for their constituents, and they need to speak up.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful that you are an active voice in this space. And you're right that we need more people to push back, because when it is an undercurrent of just people who are willing to question, and it's not people boldly willing to question, then it seems like the propaganda wins. And so just in the last minute we have with you, Dr. Bowden, and again, thank you so much. What would be your advice generally to people who are looking for better physicians who truly have their best interests, not the propaganda, in mind?
Well, as I told you early on the radio, if your doctor is recommending these shots, then you need to run and find another doctor. FLCCC is a great resource for like-minded doctors. American Frontline Doctors is also another good resource. But there's a growing number of physicians who are like-minded. I get contacted by new physicians all the time. So I think the momentum is growing if you just do your research.
Yeah, great. And keep an open mind, be willing to question. So thank you so much, Dr. Bowden. I hope that there is accountability with all of this. It should never happen again in the United States in these type of compelled experimental treatments. But we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, as the left continues to wage war on reality and forcing all of us to have these ridiculous arguments in 2024 about what is a man, what is a woman, and the fact that we have to have these so-called experts tell us what gender they think our children are, there is no greater example than yet another judicial nominee from Biden that said, "Hey, I'm not a biologist. I don't know, can't answer." So this headline coming from the Washington Times telling the story, Biden judicial nominee can't say whether chromosomes determine sex. I have never studied biology. One of President Biden's judicial nominees is under scrutiny for refusing to answer whether chromosomes determine one's biological sex, insisting that she never studied biology and is unqualified to answer. Magistrate Judge Sarah Netburn pleaded innocence of the question when asked it in a written questionnaire by Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, the top Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee. So joining me now to discuss is Walker Wildmon, who is the Vice President of the American Family Association and host of At the Core on American Family Radio Network, where I also host Jenna Ellis in the Morning. You can find all of those programs and more at afr.net. So, Walker, this is ridiculous. Nobody needs to have studied biology to know the self-evident truth that men are men and women are women. I mean, 2-year-olds can answer this. My nephews, who are like 5, 3, and my niece who's 2, they know. I mean, this is preposterous.
Yes, I'm laughing during the intro, and it's not like this is the first time I've looked at this story. I've read this thing like 7 times, and I'm still just chuckling at myself because of the lunacy here. I mean, this is 100% on a serious note. This is 100% disqualifying, 100% disqualifying, and here's why. There's a litany of areas and paths I could go here, but if you can't tell me what a woman is according to science and biology, then you cannot rule on the judiciary. You cannot sit on the federal judiciary in the Southern District of New York, because then you can't interpret the Constitution, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, because part of the Civil Rights Act is not discriminating based on sex. And if you don't know what biological sex is, then you can't rule on some of the fundamental aspects of our U.S. Constitution and our federal code. So not to mention all the state laws in New
Yeah.
York, but this is very, very problematic and 100% disqualifying. But these are the clowns that Biden is putting forth, and I can't even believe they're being taken serious. I mean, this is a complete joke, but also a very serious threat, Jenna, because these are the same folks that'll be ruling on cases in U.S. district courts and circuit courts all around this country.
Yeah, you're so right to point to some of these sex-based protections in the U.S. Constitution itself. I mean, like there are 3 different places that preserve and protect the right to vote, and the 19th Amendment specifically protects my right as a woman to vote. So how is this federal judge going to see any types of challenges like that? If she can't determine what a woman is, does she even know what a plaintiff who claims sex-based discrimination in a workplace would even qualify for that particular challenge? I mean, it is so absurd on face. But the left is putting this forward intentionally, and they're not laughing. They're very serious, because this is, I think, an intentional replacement of reality with their preferred so-called experts that then get to define reality within the confines of their own parameters. And so if we just look to the experts, then we're foreclosing parental rights, we're foreclosing a lot of our other constitutionally protected rights as individuals, and we're giving over our sovereignty essentially and our judiciary to the experts that then get to self-determine what reality must be. And I think that's really the end goal of this Marxist state.
Yeah, 100%. What's happening here is this whole idea and long-term fact pattern of choosing people for the judiciary that are qualified according to the U.S. Constitution and ruling on cases according to the Constitution and the text of the law. That's completely gone out the door for Democrats. I mean, they are choosing hardcore ideologues to put on the judiciary for 100% political and ideological purpose, not based on the Constitution or the rule of law, solely based on the whims of the Democrat Party. So that's why you get clowns like Sarah Netburn to go to the Southern District of New York. But more seriously, is these are the judges that will be ruling on cases for years to come, even in some cases, decades to come, very consequential cases. And I would argue this is the most consequential aspect of the executive branch in 2024. In the past, the judiciary maybe hasn't been as consequential, but the more ideologues they put on the judiciary, the more important it is that we don't allow a Democrat president to stay in the White House, because these appointments have ramifications for years to come and really will undermine constitutional rights for a long, long time.
Yeah, that is a great point. I mean, this isn't just solely about Trump versus Biden and some of the personality clashes and the executive orders that might be promulgated. This is about the ability of a president to choose nominees for the federal bench. And we've seen the differences now clearly between Trump's judicial appointments and Biden's, and that should be a major and key voting issue for concerned conservatives come November. And so when you're talking about the judiciary and vetting some of these appointments, we have certainly seen some from President Trump that frankly could have been better, but none that actually sat in front of the Judiciary Committee and said, "I'm not a biologist. I don't know what a woman is." I mean, there is such a wide chasm of a difference that it really does boil down to how we want to protect the judiciary for the next 30 and 40 years. So what is your advice to maybe some who are still contemplating their vote and they're thinking, I don't know what main issues to vote on, why the judiciary is so important?
Yeah, I would say to the voters out there, the judiciary is of utmost importance. Think about all the consequential cases that go before the Supreme Court that affect our everyday rights, our constitutional rights. But also, my message to the Trump campaign is to wake up to this reality that the federal judiciary should be the topic of the campaign. I mean, I get it, immigration, the economy, et cetera. I'm not saying we don't talk about those issues, but in reality, who gets to pick the next few Supreme Court justices? This is a big deal. Who gets to put justices, or rather judges on the 5th Circuit, 11th Circuit, 7th Circuit, all these different circuits? This has long-term ramifications. And if Biden gets another 4 years, I mean, can you imagine the type of radicals that are going to be on the judiciary all around the country? So to me, this Supreme Court and federal judiciary topic should be like at the forefront of the campaign. I would argue it got Trump into the White House in 2016. It could get him in again in 2024 if he focuses on it.
Yeah, well said. And I was just thinking, as you mentioned, 2016, I mean, the focus, because of the passing of Justice Scalia and that MTC, was at the fore during the 2016 campaign and was a huge issue for conservatives who did not want Hillary Clinton to be able to make that selection. Well, in 2024 through 2028, it is very possible we would see the retirement of a couple of justices, and whether they're from the left or the right ideologically, we do want to replace those justices with originalists, with good conservative justices who will protect the constitutional rights of Americans. And so that is at the fore. And I think that's very well said advice to the Trump campaign to make this a much, much bigger issue. I mean, who cares about the conviction out of New York? Focus on this. But thanks so much, Walker Wildmon. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, in a presidential election year, there's always so much commentary surrounding the presidential election, but we always have to be concerned about down ballot races as well. And there's a lot of conservative commentary, especially here on the Salem News Channel, about Republican races. But what are the Democrats focused on? Let's bring in Robin Biro, who is a Democrat strategist and my guest today. So, Robin, what are the Democrats looking at in terms of potential gains in the House and the Senate on the federal level, and even state races as well?
I'm glad you asked. And look, I just ran for state senate in the state of Georgia. I came up very narrowly shy, about 179 votes shy in a district representing 198,000 people. But I can't help but wondering if the fact that we're having a presidential race this year had anything to do with that, because Joe Biden he's drawing in the money, he's getting the donors, but there is a lack of enthusiasm, frankly, on his campaign, and I witnessed that as well on mine. I think, in general, down ballot races will be suffering this year, especially if you're older, if you're white like me. I think that they're going to equate us with Joe Biden, and that's a problem, Jenna.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, conservatives have suggested, too, that the Trump campaign may negatively impact some down ballot races as well, particularly primaries. And there's, all of these types of controversies. And so if that's true, that we have kind of this suppression on both sides because of just a lack of enthusiasm, what may that do overall to some of these important state races?
Well, we're seeing a turnout just in these early primary results. There is an overperformance right now of young people on the Democratic side. So it looks like we're picking up some of the youth vote, but we are losing some of the, people about 30 to 45, we're losing that category. We're hemorrhaging voters to the Republican Party in that category specifically. But if you look at the older people, we're actually bringing some into the Democratic Party, which was a surprise to me. I just learned that, and I was very much surprised to see that. It's going to hurt state level races. I still think that Democrats stand a pretty decent chance of retaining the Senate, but I don't think that we have any chance of regaining the House.
That's really interesting because, the Republicans have a very slim majority. And now, of course, we're talking about federal Congress heading into November. And of course, Speaker Mike Johnson has been trying to fundraise. And in fact, just earlier today, President Trump was on Capitol Hill meeting with Republican legislators to have this kind of cohesive plan. So why is it? Is it just the state of who's up for reelection? Or,
Yes.
what's your analysis in terms of why the Republicans may increase the majority?
Well, Republicans are speaking about issues, frankly, that people care about right now. The kitchen table issues. If you're talking about the price of groceries, the price of gasoline. Now, I'll say that gasoline right here in Georgia is about $2.89 a gallon. That's not so bad. But when you go to the grocery store, I myself am shopping at one of the discount grocers, Aldi, to save money because I'm a single parent with 2 kids to feed. And those are the issues that Republicans are speaking about. And I think that people can relate to that a lot more, especially people who are raising children in my age group. I'm 49 years old, so I listen. I'm a Democrat, but I listen to what my Republican counterparts have to say, and some of what they're saying to me, speaks to me as well. I've got to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to see how, the parties and especially the media has been so focused just on the court TV drama, rather than both parties actually focusing on those critical issues, because that affects everybody, Democrat or Republican. And so just in the last minute we have left, let's talk about the Senate side. So you think Democrats rather are going to stay in control of the Senate?
That's tricky. It involves a huge amount of money, and just on the state Senate side, that involved so much more money than I anticipated. And having to fundraise that amount of money is ridiculously insane. I can't even imagine on the U.S. Senate side what it must be like. But I think that we'll pull through. We'll be talking a lot about abortion. It's going to work in Democrats' favor. That the Supreme Court protected
Judiciary, but we got to leave it there. Yeah. I mean, of course, judicial nominations. But thanks so much, Robin. We'll be right back with more. Well, despite their desire to take over the world, the Democrats really don't seem to care much about the future of the world because they don't want to have kids. So this was a very interesting Pew Research statistic that Brad Wilcox, who wrote a great book called Get Married and is advocating for having kids as a UVA professor, posted on Twitter. This was his X post. New Pew Research, staggering 40% point gap between Biden and Trump backers in percentage who say society should prioritize marriage and kids. 59% of Trump supporters prioritize marriage and kids. Only 19% of Biden supporters prioritize marriage and kids. So this was the graphic also attached to that tweet that said Trump supporters far more likely than Biden supporters to say society should prioritize marriage and having children. So that coming from the Pew Research Center. So Jeff Hunt, who is a Salem media radio host on 710 KUS Denver, joins me now to discuss. So Jeff, it seems like maybe we should just outbreed the liberals.
Right. Well, we're eventually going to win. And demographics is destiny. But 4 in 5, Jenna, 4 in 5 Democrats are like, kids, marriage, meh, I'm not that interested in it. I'd rather live alone, partnering with the government, eating bugs, with my Greta Thunberg idolization poster up in my bedroom, believing that somehow Samuel Alito and his wife are engaging in conspiracy theories. No, it is heartbreaking to see what has happened to the left. You look, getting married, having kids, building families, they used to be a value that transcended parties. The idea, and not everybody's going to get married and have kids, but the idea that it's good for society, that used to transcend our politics. It was part of just kind of American culture. Now they've jumped off the cliff entirely. They're going to run into a demographic problem. But here's the key, Jenna. You got to keep your kids away from them because they're not going to have their own kids. So they're going to want to go after your kids. They're going to primarily do that through the public school system. So you got to get your kids out of it.
Yeah, so well said. I mean, the Democrats don't want to have their own kids. They want to be these like, TERFs or FERFs or, whatever they're calling these acronyms of like the dual income DINKs, dual income, no kids,
Yes.
And all of these, the fur baby things and whatever. But that is not stopping them then from coming after the conservatives' children because they know that they need to populate their ideology to persist into the next generation. And so they're taking conservative kids through the indoctrination of government funded institutions. And it's really remarkable that conservative parents are allowing this to happen. And a lot of people say, well, I don't have any other choice. But this is why school choice and policy really matters and why parental rights matter and why conservative parents, the number one thing that they need to do is protect the interests of their children and their worldview over and above allowing them to be indoctrinated into Marxism.
100%. These schools, these government-run schools are purely leftist indoctrination camps, like you just said. Kids in Denver public schools, for instance, only 20% are proficient in math. 80% of the kids are not proficient in math. But look, the left had two options since they're killing their own offspring. To go after and try to change society. One is to do it through government-run schools with your kids. But since conservatives are pulling their kids out, they're not going to have that option anymore. So they're relying on illegal immigration now to be able to backfill schools in Denver. I'm serious about this. They need illegal immigrants in order to keep government schools open. But listen to this, Jenna. Even in Denver public schools, where you have lots of illegal immigrants coming into the tune of the state having to spend $24 million to educate them, they're even pulling their kids out of Denver public schools because they've seen how woke and indoctrinated these schools are. So the families from illegal immigrants are like, you guys are too much. We're going to homeschool our own kids now. So
Wow.
They're not going to be left with anything. Eventually, conservatives are going to win the demographic battle because we understand that future citizens come from healthy families. And so we prioritize raising children and make it important. It's not about going to the latest sushi bar. It's not about traveling to Cancun. It's about investing in your families and making sure that you're helping raise the next generation well.
Yeah, and I hope we will end up winning the demographic battle. But, if Biden has his way, he's going to import the next generation of Democrats from other countries as well. So there is an attack on all fronts and an invasion of the U.S. For this great replacement. And that is why conservatives need to focus on prioritizing children and families and marriage. But the church does as well, because, speaking as someone who's a single woman who, wants to be married and have kids, I know many other single women just in my own neighborhood here in Florida where we're wondering, where are all the men? Where are the guys who are not, just out there thinking that maybe they can become a woman or having, they're focused on their career. We are being told even in the churches often, thankfully not my church in Florida, but even in churches often, wait, don't get married so young, don't have kids, don't look for a spouse. If God has one for you, then, it'll just magically appear. And we would never have that same attitude toward anything else that God commands of his people, which is to have a family and be invested in the three institutions that God has ordained: civil government, church government, family government. When I moved to Florida, the first thing I did was look for a church. I didn't just sit here and say, well, if God wants me to, become a member of a church, magically, a flyer will appear on my doorstep. It's so ridiculous. So where's the church here at in promoting marriage, especially among young people, but also people in my age demographic?
Well, Catholics have gotten this right, and that was kind of influenced my life when we first got married. To have kids right away, build a big family, and it's going to be great. And the truth is, God's taking care of us, and we've done great with our kids and our family. But dudes, the best ladies are in churches. You got to throw out the bar scene, get rid of the app, go check out the church. I got to tell you, Jenna, I don't think many guys are going to be that attracted to liberal women anymore. because what are you going to get with it? I mean, seriously, they're not interested in building a family. They're willing to kill their own offspring. And that is who you're going to want to have raising your children, investing in building a family. So I think this is bad news for liberal women, too. And if you want good dudes, they're in churches. And guys, the good ladies are in churches as well. Let's make that a good place to build families. But to your point, you're exactly right. Churches need to make this a lot more of a bigger priority, take it a lot more seriously.
Yeah, yeah. And really well said that, this isn't just about the bar scene. It's not about just looking for someone to have fun with. And it's also not, just isolating either your spouse or your children to aspect of your life while still selfishly focusing on yourself. I mean, that's what the left does when they do have kids. They view them often as just their progressive little trophies, and this is why so many leftist parents are actually wanting to have queer children to hold them up as some sort of prize. And the commodification of the family has just been such a detriment to society as well. This is something that we need to put the correct focus on what it truly means to raise a family in fear and admonition of the Lord. And so, if leftist families are raising kids in their own self-image, then certainly Christians should be willing to raise a family in God's image.
Well, look at the states that are doing great, too. For instance, Utah. I'm not LDS, but the Mormons have built a really great state. By all accounts, it's one of the top states in the country because they do prioritize family, right? So you need to put that energy there. There was a great book written by Yoram Hazony. It went like wildfire through the conservative circles called Conservatism or Rediscovery. It made one really simple argument. We want to win back the culture. You live a conservative life. You invest in building a family. You take care of your parents. This goes both ways, not just down, but up as well. We don't just push people off into nursing homes. I understand there's sometimes going to be medical requirements that somebody needs to have concern. But just because we want to get access to inheritance or we don't want to take care of them, we push them off and not provide for them. We need to be putting our children in relationships with their parents. So you have that multi-generational transmission of values. We win when we build conservative culture and live and lead conservative lives.
Yeah, so well said. And this is all about honoring our father and mother as well, and not just living isolated lives, because in this day and age and convenience culture, we doesn't mean that we should. We'll be right back with more with Jeff Hunt. And we're back with Jeff Hunt, who is a Salem media radio host out of KNUS Denver. And you should listen to him local time from 6 to 10 a.m. Props to you, Jeff, for getting up that early. I host radio from 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern, and that sometimes is even too early. But let's turn to politics. And Biden's abysmal approval rating, it's just laughable at this point. It's like, 2 people actually think Biden's doing a good job, and yet he's like neck to neck with Trump in all of these swing states. It's preposterous. And so where is the disconnect here between Biden approval rating versus these idiots who are actually thinking about voting for him again?
Yeah, there's not many left. Look, Joe Biden's approval ratings are so low that billionaires are renting submarines to go down and look at the wreckage. That's how bad it is. It's so bad. Tanya Harding is like, Joe Biden, get a grip on your personal profile. This is terrible. Look, there's only like 38% of America left, and not even that's willing to say this guy's doing a good job. I think it was Mitch McConnell that called it the Maginot Line, that if you're below 46%, which Joe Biden is right now, he's down in the mid-30s in your approval rating, you have no chance of getting reelected. But Jenna, I've followed you on X. I know that this is an important conversation for you. The real question is, are people willing to like Donald Trump enough to be willing to vote for him? Or would have Republicans been in a much better place in this poll if Ron DeSantis, for instance, was the nominee? Would that have locked it up much easier? Because you have 2 candidates that in some cases are embraced by a small base, but the other side really doesn't like. And look, I'm a Donald Trump fan, but there's a real question as to right now if he could, stomp on Joe Biden and win this campaign handedly, or would have another Republican nominee like Ron DeSantis easily have won because he's not so high in the unfavorable. So is it bad news for Joe Biden? Absolutely. But is it a total end of Joe Biden's political career? Not necessarily, because there's a lot of people that don't like Donald Trump just as passionately as some don't like Joe Biden. So we're going to be stuck. This is really a very unique election, one that I don't think our country has seen in a very, very long time, definitely not in my lifetime.
Yeah, and I think it's even much different than 2016, when a ton of people who hated Hillary weren't really sure of Trump, but were willing to give him a chance literally just to vote against Hillary. Now you have two very, very known quantities, like you know what you're getting, but you have this immense, I think, hatred on both sides. And I appreciate that you are willing to approach the conversation, Jeff Hunt, with saying that and pointing that out about Trump. I mean, it's not that, like, I don't hate Trump. I think that he did a great job in his administration, certainly with judicial selections. I mean, all of these things we could list his accomplishments, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he is the best candidate for the GOP in 2024. But it seems like here we are, and there is still the convention to be had. It will be after the July 11th sentencing, and now the left is using this line "convicted felon," which may have some impact for some moderate voters. But the question really becomes, should the GOP have this conversation on a broader scale and look toward a potential brokered convention, or do we just kind of let the election play out as it will?
Dude, it's fascinating. For those of us that follow politics, think about it. Just think about it. And I say this as a big Donald Trump fan. What if you went into that convention with this polling number and it switched to someone like Ron DeSantis? Would he win in big numbers because Joe Biden is so unpopular? Or, and here's another thing, the Democrats don't have the ability that Republicans do to offer up somebody as an alternative that is generally universally liked, right? Who on the Democrat side can step in? It's not going to be Kamala Harris. It's not going to be Gavin Newsom. Can't be Jared Polis or Bernie Sanders. They got nobody. There's nobody on their bench. They're stuck with Joe Biden, even when he has a son that's been convicted on federal gun charges. They're literally stuck with the guy because there's nobody in the wings. Republicans, though, you have Nikki Haley. Okay, I'm not a fan of her on foreign affairs. Ron DeSantis is literally what you would design in a lab if you wanted the greatest governor of all time, right? Like, he's right up there and he's doing a great job. Just what if you still have the convention? I don't think we'll probably shift. I think we'll stay committed with Donald Trump through it. But man, what an exercise in what could happen if Ron DeSantis stepped up. He would destroy Joe Biden in these polls. But instead, we're going to go into kind of a really heated general election between two people that are very well known, with very stark disapprovals and approval ratings based upon their base. I don't know.
It's crazy. And we got to leave it there, but it is. I mean, and I think we should be asking that question. So head into the weekend on that one. I'll see you on Monday.